My siblings' indifference during the worst period of my life still stings. I felt less like family and more like hired help, but they were too blind to see what was brewing. I'm 23, and until recently, my family was my everything. We were inseparable, spending nearly all my free time together. There's Leah, my oldest sister, who's 30, Sophie, who's 28, and my brother, Adam, who's 35. Between them, they have 4 kids, and for years, I was their go-to aunt and babysitter. I genuinely adored those kids. I never really minded helping out because, honestly, my own life felt a bit empty. I didn't have much of a social life to speak of, so when my siblings needed a hand with the kids, I jumped in. It gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to feel needed. Looking back, I was probably too eager to be the one they always called. It seemed like every weekend I was either babysitting or spending my meager savings on fun outings for the kids. My siblings are all much better off financially than I am, especially Adam with his fancy job. Yet, somehow, I was always the one paying for toys, snacks, and trips to the movies. I never really questioned it then. I just thought I was being a good aunt. But now I wonder, was I being generous, or was I just being taken advantage of? For years, things went on like this. I was always available for babysitting, attending school plays, and entertaining the kids on weekends so my siblings could have some time to themselves. My own life felt a little incomplete, so I suppose it filled a void. I didn't have a close-knit group of friends, and I wasn't in a serious relationship, so the kids became the center of my world. Then, about a year ago, everything changed in an instant. I had this ridiculous accident in my apartment. I tripped over something. I think it was a laundry basket, and ended up severely injured. I couldn't walk, and both my hands were badly damaged. The doctor said I was looking at 6 months, maybe even longer, of physical therapy and recovery. I went from being active and independent to completely helpless, unable to even feed myself. In the first few weeks after the accident, I was still in shock. I couldn't believe this was actually happening to me. My first thought was, okay, my family will step up and help me, right? After all, I'd always been there for them, always ready to lend a hand. Now, I needed to lean on them for a change. I was so wrong, completely and utterly mistaken. The accident landed me in the hospital for a couple of days, and I vaguely recall Leah visiting once. A quick 20-minute pop-in, and then she was gone. Adam sent a text, something along the lines of, "Heard about your fall. Bummer. Get better soon." Sophie didn't even bother with a personal message. A group text sufficed, claiming she was swamped at work, but hoping I was okay. A tiny alarm bell started ringing in my head then, but I stubbornly ignored it, chalking it up to their own stress and busy lives. After all, they have kids, demanding jobs, full schedules. I didn't want to be the needy one, the one expecting too much. Coming home was the worst part. I've never felt so profoundly alone. Try navigating life independently when you can barely hobble to the bathroom. It's a humbling experience, to say the least. Cooking was impossible, cleaning even more so, and even brushing my hair felt like a Herculean task. I ended up chopping off most of it, simply because I couldn't manage it. The weight I lost those first few months was alarming, entirely due to my inability to prepare food. My fridge was bare, and I survived on a depressing diet of crackers and protein shakes. Pride kept me from asking for help. It felt like admitting defeat. That's when I noticed the deafening silence from my own family. Before the accident, my phone constantly buzzed with requests from my siblings. Could I babysit, pick up a child from school, run some errand? After? Nothing. Not a single phone call to check on me, not a single offer to bring groceries, or simply see how I was doing. It was as if I had vanished. I was forced to rely on Nancy, my next-door neighbor, whom I barely knew, to grab a few groceries for me. This woman, practically a stranger, showed more compassion than my own flesh and blood. Around the 3rd month of being confined to my apartment, practically helpless, the truth finally sank in. They only cared when I was useful. When I was the convenient babysitter, the reliable errand runner. I was the perfect sister, the favorite aunt, but now that I was the one in need? Silence. That realization cut deeper than the physical injuries. I'd always believed we were a close family, but the moment I was no longer a free service, they couldn't even spare a phone call. The anger simmered, then steadily rose with each passing day. Initially, I excused them. They must be overwhelmed, stressed, I reasoned. Maybe life just got in the way. But months bled together, filled with nothing but silence, and the bitter truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't a priority. There were days I couldn't drag myself out of bed, just lay there, staring at my phone, pathetic in my hope that one of them would reach out. A simple call, a quick text, anything to acknowledge I existed, to ask if I needed help. But the screen remained blank. The physical pain from the accident was brutal, but the emotional wound cut deeper. The realization that I wasn't as valued as I believed was a constant ache. Years of bending over backwards for their kids, sacrificing my weekends, spending my money, convinced I was forging a strong, familial bond, now felt like a naive charade. By the time I was finally hobbling around, anger had solidified into something hard and resistant. My mind kept replaying all those calls, those constant requests to watch the kids so they could have a date night, a break, some time to themselves. The bitter irony was that they never extended that same courtesy to me, not once. It was as if they viewed me solely as their on-call, unpaid childcare, and the second I was unable to fulfill that role, I became irrelevant. You'd think after the accident, after everything, my family would have recognized their colossal oversight, the chasm of distance that had grown between us. Maybe they would have noticed my withdrawal and made some genuine effort to bridge the gap. But no, they continued on as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just navigated one of the most harrowing experiences of my life completely alone. As my physical strength returned, slowly and painfully, the mental recovery was a different beast altogether. A cauldron of resentment bubbled inside. I didn't know how to broach the subject, how to express the depth of my hurt without igniting a full-blown war, so I held my tongue, waiting, watching, hoping for some kind of sign. But one thing was certain. I was finished being their default babysitter. That chapter of my life was irrevocably closed. Then, the phone rang. It was Sophie, my middle sister, her tone sickeningly casual. "Hey," she said, "the kids really miss you. Do you think you could take them for the weekend?" I nearly hurled my phone across the room. After months of radio silence, after the accident, after everything, the first contact I receive is a request for a favor. "No, how are you feeling?" "No, we haven't seen you, are you okay?" Just straight to the point. She needed free childcare. Was she actually serious? So I told her, calmly but firmly, no, I'm not babysitting anymore, at least not for a while. It felt like the only way to start drawing some much-needed boundaries. I wasn't ready to unleash the full force of "I'm furious because you abandoned me," but I had to make it crystal clear that things had fundamentally shifted. Predictably, Sophie didn't take it well. She feigned confusion, acting as if she couldn't comprehend why I was refusing. Then came the guilt trip, a familiar tactic. She launched into a litany of how much the kids missed me and how incredibly difficult things had been for her lately. In the past, that would have worked. I used to be a complete pushover, especially when it came to them and, particularly, the kids. But that wasn't going to be the case this time. I stood my ground, a firm resolve settling in my chest, and told her, my voice steady, that I needed to prioritize myself for a while. Her reaction was immediate, a huff, a sharp intake of breath, and then, "Well, I just didn't realize you were so busy these days." Busy? The audacity stung. I'd spent months, an eternity it felt like, recovering from an injury that had irrevocably altered my life, navigating the pain and the loneliness completely on my own. And now, suddenly, I was too busy for her? That brief phone call, the casual dismissal in her tone, solidified what I'd been suspecting for so long. It felt like they only valued me when I was convenient, when I could offer something. After that conversation, the need for a reckoning became undeniable. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the hurt, both physical and emotional, was still so raw. So I sent a text message to Leah, Sophie, and Adam, suggesting we meet for lunch at that old cafe, the one we used to frequent. It felt like a neutral space, a place where we could, hopefully, talk things through without too much added pressure. But as the day approached, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I had no idea how they'd react to what I wanted to say, to the feelings I had been harboring. Yet I knew I couldn't keep everything locked inside any longer. It was suffocating me. When we finally sat down around that familiar table, the initial atmosphere was jarringly normal. They were laughing, catching up on trivial matters, acting as if nothing had changed, as if months hadn't passed in silent neglect. Meanwhile, I sat there, the chasm between their apparent nonchalance and my simmering resentment growing wider with each passing minute. I was on edge, fighting the urge to either burst into tears or explode in anger. Finally, I couldn't bear it anymore. "We need to talk," I blurted out, the words hanging heavy in the air, instantly extinguishing the light-hearted mood. The shift was palpable, the air thick with unspoken tension. I told them, my voice trembling slightly, how deeply wounded I had been by their absence during my recovery. How their sudden disappearance when I needed them most felt like a betrayal. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid bare the loneliness, the abandonment, the crushing realization that our friendship seemed conditional. The words poured out of me, a torrent of pent-up emotion, leaving me shaking but also strangely liberated. Leah was the first to respond, and her words, uttered with such casual indifference, nearly broke me. "Well, you never actually asked for help," she said, as if that absolved them of all responsibility. "We just assumed you were fine." I was stunned. Did they truly expect me to beg? I couldn't walk, I couldn't perform the simplest tasks, and they knew that. My vulnerability wasn't a secret, it was a glaring reality. I responded, my voice rising with incredulity. "Why would I have to ask? You saw me in the hospital, hooked up to machines. You knew I couldn't even get out of bed. Is that what our friendship meant to you all along?" Then Adam jumped in, his tone immediately defensive. "We all have our own lives, you know," he retorted. "It's not like we were just sitting around doing nothing." And that's when my fragile composure completely shattered. I laid it all out for them, how I'd spent years prioritizing their lives and their kids over my own. Weekends vanished, my savings dwindled, my energy drained, all poured into being there for them. And the one time I needed a sliver of that returned, they couldn't even pick up the phone. I told them, point blank, that I was retiring from my role as their on-call, free babysitter, and that from this point forward, boundaries were being erected, reinforced, and strictly observed. Leah's face contorted with anger. Her immediate reaction was, "So, you're just cutting us off? Punishing the kids because we weren't attentive enough?" That's when the Guilt Trip Express train arrived. They relentlessly paraded the kids before me, lamenting how much they missed me, how confused they were by my absence. But I refused to be manipulated back into the old, unequal dynamic. "This isn't about the kids," I stated firmly. "This is about you treating me like I only matter when I'm performing a service for you." Then Sophie, ever the mediator, finally chimed in. She attempted a placating tone, saying, "We're sorry if we made you feel that way, but you never actually told us how bad things were." The audacity! They were still somehow framing this as my fault for not explicitly articulating the obvious. I just sat there, shaking my head in disbelief. I shouldn't have to beg my own family for basic consideration. It was at that point that I realized this conversation was utterly futile. They were incapable of seeing things from my vantage point, and a genuine apology or admission of wrongdoing was clearly off the table. So I stood up and walked away. As I exited the cafe, a strange cocktail of anger and relief washed over me. I was furious that they still didn't comprehend the core issue, but also relieved that I had finally verbalized all the resentment I'd been silently harboring. For what felt like the first time in ages, I was prioritizing my own well-being, and the sensation was liberating. Following that excruciating cafe encounter, the already strained relationship with my siblings deteriorated further. It was as if we existed on completely different planes of reality. No one seemed willing to even consider my perspective, and I certainly wasn't about to back down and revert to my former doormat status. For the first time in my life, I was asserting my needs and protecting my emotional space, and I refused to be guilt-tripped back into being their personal, unpaid childcare provider. A week or two drifted by in the aftermath of that explosion, and I heard absolutely nothing from any of them. No calls, no texts, complete radio silence. It was somewhat anticipated, but the silence still stung a little. You'd think that after I had laid bare my soul, they might at least inquire about my well-being, but no, just nothing. And honestly, that deafening silence communicated more than any words they could have offered. But then, completely unexpectedly, Adam called me. The phone rang, and a part of me didn't even want to answer, but my curiosity always gets the better of me. I pressed the answer button. Adam launched right in, bypassing any semblance of polite conversation. "So, you're really done with babysitting, then?" he asked. I could already feel my stomach clenching. This wasn't going to be pleasant. "Yeah, Adam, I'm done," I stated, trying to keep my voice even. "I told you that already." He sighed, and then dropped the bomb. "Leah and Sophie are thinking about cutting you off from seeing the kids." I was stunned. I knew my sisters could be self-absorbed, but this felt like a whole new level. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They're actually going to use the kids like that just because I won't babysit anymore?" Adam, ever the pragmatist, responded, "Well, they feel like if you're not going to help, why should you get to be around them? It's a two-way thing." The audacity of it. Babysitting was now the price of admission to my nieces' and nephews' lives. A surge of anger went through me, but I refused to let Adam see it. I needed to stay calm. "Look, I love those kids," I said, "but I'm not going to be manipulated into doing things for you guys. If Leah and Sophie want to keep me from seeing them, that's their decision." Adam just shrugged it off like it was nothing. He immediately transitioned into talking about his new job, all the travel involved, and how hard it was to juggle work and family. It was like he was completely oblivious to the emotional fallout of what he'd just said. I cut the conversation short as soon as I could. Hanging up, I was left with this strange cocktail of emotions. A piece of my heart ached at the thought of not seeing the kids, but another part of me was simply exhausted. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly feeling guilty and manipulated. If they really intended to punish me by keeping the children away, then so be it. I wouldn't play along with their game. A couple of weeks passed, and then I got a call from Sophie. She sounded saccharine sweet, which immediately raised a red flag. Sophie only turns on the charm when she wants something. "Hey," she chirped, "I've been thinking, and the kids have been asking about you. They really miss you. I was wondering if you could maybe take them for a day next week? Just one day, nothing big, I promise. I'll pick them up early." I almost burst out laughing. Sophie was doing exactly what Adam had warned me about, trying to lure me back into babysitting with the kids as bait. I wasn't biting. "I miss them terribly, Sophie, but I'm not babysitting anymore. I've made that clear." Her voice did a complete 180, going from saccharine sweet to outright angry in a heartbeat. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult. You used to adore spending time with them. Now, suddenly, you're too good for us? Too good for the whole family." That stung, I won't lie, but I managed to keep my voice level. "It's not about being too good for anyone, Sophie. It's about respect and boundaries. I sacrificed so much of my own life for you all, and when I was the one who needed support, no one stepped up. I'm not going back to being just the convenient call when you're in a bind." Sophie wasn't having any of it. "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect us to feel sorry for you when the kids completely forget who you are." Then she slammed the phone down. That call really rattled me. I sat there for a long time afterward, just replaying her words in my head. Was she right? Were Emma and Leo really going to forget me? I had poured so much time and love into those kids, been there for every little thing, every first step, Every birthday party, every tear. It felt like I was losing them, and the thought was a sharp, painful ache in my chest. Still, I knew deep down that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't. After that conversation, I tried desperately to distract myself. I threw all my energy into my work, tried to rekindle friendships I'd neglected, even started going out on the weekends, something I hadn't done in ages. It felt strange at first, having so much time to focus on myself, on my own needs and desires. For years, my entire world had revolved around my sister's family and their children, and now that I was no longer in that orbit, I felt adrift, unsure of what to do with myself. But slowly, tentatively, I began to find my footing. I was starting to piece together a life of my own. Then, a few weeks later, I got the call that truly devastated me. It was Leah this time, and she sounded utterly panicked. She told me that Emma, the youngest, had been in an accident. She'd fallen off her bike and broken her arm. My phone rang, Leah's name flashing across the screen. Her voice was frantic, telling me Emma was being rushed to the hospital and she needed me to watch the other two kids. My stomach dropped. Those kids are dear to me, and the thought of Emma in pain twisted my insides. But simultaneously, a weary recognition settled over me. It was always like this. I was only summoned when they were in crisis, when they needed a favor. Suddenly, I was important again. A wave of indecision washed over me. I felt a pang of guilt even considering saying no, but I was also terrified of slipping back into that old dynamic. Taking a shaky breath, I told Leah, "I'm so sorry about Emma, truly, but I'm not able to help right now. I really hope she's all right." The silence on the other end stretched, thick and heavy. Then her voice, cold and distant, cut through the air. "I can't believe you. After everything, you're actually going to do this? I thought you cared about this family." And just like that, she hung up. After that call, I felt like the most awful person imaginable. The question kept swirling in my mind, what if Emma is seriously hurt and I'm sitting here refusing to help? But I had to consciously remind myself that this wasn't my fault. This was a well-worn pattern. They only seemed to remember I existed when they needed something. If it weren't for this accident, would Leah have even bothered to call? I seriously doubted it. Even so, the guilt gnawed at me. So later that night, I texted Leah. I kept it simple, just, "I hope Emma is okay. Please let me know if you need anything." Predictably, there was no reply. It was as if I was only valuable when it suited them, and the moment I dared to establish a boundary, I became invisible. Days passed, and I began to hear fragments of information through other family members about how my siblings were supposedly deeply hurt by my refusal. Apparently, they were telling everyone that I had abandoned the family and that I no longer cared about them. It was unbelievable. How could they twist the situation like that? I wasn't the one who did the abandoning. They were the ones who pushed me away when I was at my most vulnerable. The situation finally reached a boiling point when my dad called. Now, my dad tends to stay out of the daily squabbles. He's always been the family peacemaker, my dad. So, when my phone buzzed and I saw his name, and he said, "We need to talk, kiddo," a wave of dread washed over me. I just knew I was about to get a lecture. We agreed to meet at his house, and the moment I stepped inside, the air felt thick with unspoken disapproval. Dad was already at the kitchen table, and I could see the lines of stress etched around his eyes. He didn't even offer me a drink, just dove right in. "I've been hearing from your siblings," he began, "and they're really hurt by your recent behavior." My eyes instinctively wanted to roll, but I swallowed it down. "Dad, I don't know what they've been telling you, but I haven't abandoned anyone. I've simply stopped offering free childcare, that's all." He gave a short nod, but I could tell he was hearing them more clearly than me. "I understand you've been through a lot lately, but family is family, you know the saying. Sometimes, we have to do things we don't enjoy for the sake of those we love." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father was suggesting that I suppress my own needs and go back to being their on-call, unpaid babysitter, all in the name of family. I tried to explain how much their absence during my recovery had hurt me, how isolating it felt, but it was like talking to a wall. He kept repeating things like, "They didn't mean to hurt you, honey, and everyone's busy with their own lives, you know?" By the end of that conversation, I was so frustrated I felt like I couldn't think straight. My dad just didn't get it. He wasn't present enough to witness how much I was constantly doing for my siblings, and he definitely didn't seem to understand how abandoned I felt when they practically vanished after my accident. He wrapped up the talk with a classic, "Just try to work it out, kiddo. They love you, they really do." But to me, love isn't treating someone like they only matter when it's convenient for you. After that conversation, I significantly reduced contact with them all. It felt like the only way I could protect my sanity was to create some serious distance. I simply couldn't be around people who didn't respect me enough to treat me like a person with my own needs and boundaries. So, I blocked Leah and Sophie on my phone and deleted the family group chat. I left Adam unblocked because, honestly, he wasn't the worst of the three, but I wasn't exactly eager to talk to him either. Then came the most difficult part, the kids. I didn't want to completely cut them out of my life. They were innocent in all of this, and it wouldn't be fair to them. So, I reached out to one of my nieces, Natalie, who's 12 and has her own phone. I sent her a text, just asking how she was and telling her I missed her. She responded pretty quickly, saying she missed me, too, and that she'd been asking her mom, Sophie, why she hadn't seen me in so long. That just broke my heart. I didn't want the kids to think I had just disappeared from their lives, but at the same time, I couldn't let myself get pulled back into being their default babysitter. So I told Natalie that I loved her and her cousins, and I was always here for them, but things with the family were kind of complicated right now. She said she understood, even though I could tell she didn't really. Still, I appreciated the gesture. It always surprised me how insightful kids could be, more so than adults sometimes. After that conversation, I made a conscious effort to connect with the kids directly. No more filtering through Leah or Sophie. I'd send them texts, little trinkets I thought they might like, a goofy sticker, a cool pen, just little reminders that I was thinking of them. It wasn't the same as being there, of course, but it felt like the best I could manage given the situation. The next few months were strange. I was still navigating this new version of myself, one that wasn't constantly being pulled in a million different directions by my family's needs. I started spending more time with people from work, grabbing coffee after our shift. I even joined a gym again, something I hadn't done in years. It felt good, like I was finally prioritizing myself for once. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was in control of my own schedule, my own life. But of course, peace never lasts long with my family. One afternoon, my phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a little voice inside me, told me to answer. It was Leah, calling from a burner phone, I guessed, since I had blocked her number. Real mature, I thought wryly to myself. She launched right into it. "I don't know what your problem is, but you need to stop ignoring me. No hello, no how are you doing?" Just straight to the attack. I told her, calmly, that I wasn't ignoring her. I was setting boundaries. And if she didn't like them, well, that wasn't my problem. Leah wouldn't have it. She started laying into me, saying how the kids were suffering because of my absence, how much they missed me, how I was tearing the family apart. Then, she had the audacity to accuse me of being selfish, of needing to get over myself and start acting like part of the family again. That did it. I'd finally reached my limit. I told her, "You know what, Leah? Maybe I'm not the problem here. Maybe the problem is that you've all taken me for granted for years. And now that I'm finally prioritizing myself, you don't like it." She tried to interrupt, to argue, but I wouldn't let her. I hung up the phone and blocked that number, too. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just a break. I was done. Done with the manipulation, the constant guilt trips, the endless demands. If they couldn't respect me, if they couldn't respect my boundaries, then they didn't deserve to be in my life. And honestly, it felt liberating. The guilt finally vanished. Actually blocking Leah felt like a physical release, like shedding a heavy coat I'd been wearing for years. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waking up with that knot of anxiety in my stomach, dreading the next manipulative phone call or wave of guilt. I could finally breathe, truly breathe. My days stretched out before me, my own to fill, and I felt a burgeoning sense of possibility, like I could actually dedicate my energy to my life for once. But the peace didn't last, of course. Maybe a month after that final, explosive argument, a letter arrived. I rarely get anything besides bills, so the handwritten envelope with my name on it caught my attention immediately. Inside was a letter from Sophie. It was long, dramatic, filled with accusations of how disappointed she was in me, how I was supposedly tearing the family apart. The usual guilt-tripping tactics were all there, recycled and repackaged. How much the kids missed me, how I was letting them down. She even had the audacity to write, "I hope one day you realize how selfish you're being, and that it's not too late to fix this." Seriously? I was selfish? I'd poured years of my life into them, and I'm the one being branded as selfish simply because I refuse to be their doormat any longer? I crumpled the letter, the cheap paper protesting under my fingers, and tossed it into the trash. I didn't even have the energy to feel truly angry anymore. I was just done. Done with the manipulation, the constant pressure, the relentless guilt. If they wanted to paint me as the villain in their narrative, fine, let them. I refused to waste another precious second of my life trying to justify myself to people who clearly didn't value me unless they needed something from me. Around the same time, an email popped up from Natalie, my niece. It was a welcome surprise. She kept it light and casual, just telling me about school, her friends, the usual teenage stuff. It warmed my heart to hear from her. I'd always told the kids they could reach out to me anytime, and Natalie was the only one who ever actually did. But then something in the email snagged my attention. Almost as an aside, she mentioned that her mom, Sophie, had told her I was too busy to see them anymore. Too busy. That was the line they were feeding the kids. The lie they were spinning to justify my absence. I was stunned. Instead of being honest, or at least acknowledging that there was some family conflict, they were making it sound like I simply didn't want to see the kids anymore, that I was off living some glamorous, self-absorbed life and couldn't be bothered with them. It made my blood boil, a cold fury simmering beneath the surface. But I knew I couldn't direct that anger at Natalie. She was just a kid, caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. It wasn't Natalie's fault, not one bit. So I wrote back to her email, telling her I missed her and that I was always there if she needed anything at all. I consciously avoided mentioning the lie her mother had told. Dragging Natalie into that mire felt wrong. But the whole exchange just underscored the growing sense that things weren't going to improve. My siblings, I realized, were determined to keep manipulating the narrative, casting me in the villain role, and the kids were caught in the middle of this awful tug-of-war. After weeks of constant internal conflict and replaying scenarios in my head, I reached a point where I knew I had to make a clean, decisive break. It was vital for my own sanity, for my mental well-being. I simply couldn't continue playing their game, always on edge, constantly anticipating the next fabricated story or the next emotional manipulation designed to pull me back in. So, I changed my phone number, again. I blocked all email addresses associated with my siblings. I essentially severed all ties. It was agonizing, especially the constant thought of the kids, but I was certain it was the only healthy path forward. Ironically, the instant I committed to this course of action, a wave of profound relief washed over me. It was as if a fog had lifted and I could finally see clearly. For what felt like an eternity, I'd been preoccupied with trying to appease everyone else, perpetually sacrificing my own happiness and stability for the sake of family. But a true family shouldn't extract that kind of toll. Family should be a source of strength, a support system that lifts you up, not one that tears you down or exploits you for convenience. The process wasn't easy, that much is certain. There were countless nights where I lay awake, my mind replaying cherished memories, holidays, birthday celebrations, shared laughter, private jokes. It wasn't as if I didn't love them, I truly did. But affection alone isn't sufficient when the people you love fundamentally disregard your value. That realization was the hardest pill to swallow. Then, completely unexpectedly, about 3 months after I'd completely cut them out of my life, I received a message on Facebook from my mother. I rarely speak about her because she has never really been a core part of the ongoing conflict and drama with my siblings. She lives several states away, and we've always maintained a somewhat detached relationship. But she must have learned something about what had transpired because her message stated, "We need to talk about what's been happening with your siblings. They are concerned about you." I rolled my eyes so dramatically, I honestly thought they might get stuck in that position. Of course they were suddenly concerned, now that they couldn't reach me to offload their problems. I debated whether I should even respond, but I decided that it was at least worthwhile to explain my perspective to my mother, since she wasn't directly involved in the sibling rivalry. I told her everything. I detailed how I had always been there for my siblings, how they utterly abandoned me when I desperately needed support, and how I had to establish strict boundaries to protect my own well-being. I didn't soften anything. I wanted her to understand precisely why I had made the choices I did. It took her a few days to reply, but when she did, her response was surprisingly supportive. She told me she got why I was hurting, that she wished things could have played out differently. But then she said something that just completely knocked me off kilter. Maybe it's time to forgive and let it go. Life's just too short to stay angry. And that's when it hit me. I'd been clinging to this hope, this fantasy really, that my family would eventually see the light. That they'd finally realize how much they'd hurt me, apologize for it, and we could somehow go back to being a family. But it wasn't going to happen. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong, and deep down I knew they probably never would. So I had to accept that. I wasn't going to offer forgiveness, not when they hadn't even acknowledged hurting me, hadn't shown even a sliver of remorse. But I was going to move on. I was going to stop letting their negativity, their toxic behavior, dictate my life anymore. That's where I am now, a few months after finally cutting ties completely. It's still tough sometimes, I'll admit, and there are days when I miss the idea of them, the family I wish we could have been. But I know in my heart that I made the right decision, the only one I could make to protect myself. I've started reaching out to old friends, people who genuinely care about me. I'm throwing myself into my career, focusing on things that bring me joy. For the first time in a long time, I'm not consumed by what my family is doing or whether they'll ever change. I don't know what the future holds for them, or if we'll ever truly reconcile. Maybe someday. But for now, I'm finding a sense of peace with where things are. And honestly, that's all I can ask for right now. It's enough.